Hello and welcome back to Dukascopy TV. Now, have global supply chains become a thing of the past? Has a rise in cost globally with other factors meant that insourcing is the new outsourcing? Well, with me in the studio to discuss all this and more is World Trade Organization Counsellor John Hancock. John, welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me again.
John, first question I'd like to ask you is the idea of insourcing and outsourcing. Outsourcing being that companies would expand, say, with call centres, for instance, and you'd have a call centre, you'd have a company in the UK would have its services to its customers out in somewhere like India. Insourcing was saying that it's the reverse, they're bringing them back to the country of origin and they're staying there. What's changed for global business when it comes to expansion like that in this financial climate?
These are good questions. I think there's been a couple of high-profile examples recently where people have assumed that this trend towards outsourcing or the development of global value chains is going into reverse. One would be the repeated problems with Boeing's Dreamliner, its new high-tech airplane, where I think Boeing originally planned to outsource something like 30% of this plane's production. It's now shrunk that ambition to something like 5% of its production because of inabilities to oversee quality, delays in different components from parts of the world arriving. And that's given a sense that maybe a big company like Boeing is rethinking outsourcing. Other companies are. There's also been some talk of Foxconn, the giant Taiwanese technology company, bringing production back to the United States for Apple computers.
And that's because of a tightening of the belt, if you like, tightening of the purse strings, because perhaps in this current crisis we're having at the moment, although many analysts would say we're picking up a little bit, or stabilizing at least, generally the feeling is when you have a company such as Boeing, as you mentioned, withdrawing, that's a bad sign. It's a sign that outsourcing may have to come back home.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical of taking these isolated examples and extrapolating into long-term trends. I think in some ways these stories feed into a political narrative in these countries where the United States or Britain want to believe that manufacturing is key to prosperity. You want a return to the blue-collar jobs, and there are signs that this scary, uncertain, threatening globalization process is going to go into reverse and the jobs are going to come home. I'm not so sure that if you actually looked at the figures that would prove to be the case.
Okay, now I understand that the World Trade Organization has recently done a study looking at trends on global supply chains. What exactly did you find in that study, John?
It was a study that the W.T.O did in conjunction with the OECD, and what they found is that instead of this outsourcing or global supply chain phenomenon being exaggerated and going into reverse, in fact, we've underestimated it.
So it's the opposite. It's
actually
growing.
It's actually growing. I mean, the study found that something like half of all world merchandise trade now is in intermediate goods, the various components of the supply chain. It found that 40% of all exported products are based on externally imported products. That's up 20% that's doubled 20 years ago. And there's a projection that in 20 years' time it could rise to 60% of all exports. And that's really changed the way we look at trade. I mean, it makes, for example, protectionism or economic nationalism, the kind of things that President Obama or Prime Minister David Cameron seem to be talking about, look even more obsolete. If you want to expand your exports in this world, you've got to expand your imports. If you want to create a trade barrier to imports, you're effectively taxing your exports, and it just doesn't make sense.
So what you're essentially saying is the study that the World Trade Organization has conducted shows that isolated cases like the Boeing case really doesn't paint the bigger picture. And that actual fact, outsourcing is growing more than it ever has been.
We live in a moment now where it seems that the economic fundamentals look good, better, improving. We've got through the crisis, and things that were meant to have happened are happening. Industries restructuring, Housing markets are showing tentative signs of recovery. Balance sheets look better, and in some cases quite good. So the underlying fundamental economics of the global economy seem to be improving. Politics seem to be deteriorating.
Okay, so politics is causing the problems, but actually the growth of business is actually booming more than it's ever done before. And we can see that some of that is also in China, because there was a whole sort of complaints last year, or concerns last year, that China, second biggest economy in the world, was slowing down. But this year, beginning of 2013, it's like, well, it's still grown. Was it 7.8% last year?
Yeah. So it's a spectacular number. I mean, it's not the 9% or 10% we saw over the last decade, but 7.8% is a phenomenal number. A nation of 1.3 billion people. You grow at 7% a year. Within a decade, an economy doubles in size. So we're looking at China doubling in a decade at that rate, or over doubling. But the politics again are interesting. I mean, if this study's anything to go by, one of the things that was shown is that the made in label, the made in China label, the made in Germany label tends to distort the bilateral picture. In 2009, for example, it was reported that China's trade surplus with the United States was somewhere around $176 billion. When you work out intermediate components, the extent to which the United States is itself exporting components or services or intellectual property, so China can re-export the iPad or the iPhone back to the United States, that trade surplus drops to $131 billion, 25% less. So even the politics of analyzing international trade is more negative than the underlying picture.
John, thank you very much for coming in the studio again.
Okay. Good to be here.
That's all we've got time for at the moment on Dukascopy TV. Of course, we'll be back next week for further interviews and those all-important updates. But from everyone here at Dukascopy TV, for now, have a great weekend. Goodbye.